a big reason I wanted to talk to you. So this podcast kind of surrounds, dealing with anxiety, and I'm certainly not opposed to, medication when need be, of course, to help, aid in getting better when you have anxiety and depression. But I'm also very much interested into, how your diet, how your surroundings, how all of those kind of things can affect that. And
Yeah.
I came across your work, and I was really excited about how you kind of talked about, how your gut health can really help with your cognitive function, and, how food can just as much, as medication can kind of help you feel better.
Hmm.
So, that's, I guess, kind of where I wanted to start our conversation, was sort of like this idea of, the gut being our second brain, and kind of how that can affect how we think, how we function, how we feel. If we could kind of dive in a little bit into that, I'd love that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's something that I'm immersed with. My day job is really immersing myself in cases, in complex cases. As a functional medicine practitioner, we consult patients around the world via webcam, like we're talking now, and getting the pieces to their puzzle. And in functional medicine, the way that I see it, we see things like anxiety or depression or fatigue or brain fog or any other autoimmune issue. We see those as like the check engine lights on a car. The check engine light's on, but why? So we have to look underneath the hood, proverbially speaking, and saying what's causing that. So you could have 100 people with anxiety or any other health problem, and what's driving it for one person isn't driving it for the next person. So we have to keep an open mind, and that's when a good comprehensive health history and like getting to the root cause from just like getting to know somebody and like what's their story look like, what are the components to their care, what's the components to why they feel the way that they do, and then getting evidence-based labs and being running relevant labs, but getting multiple labs perspective from their vantage point, what's going on here, because it's very rarely one thing or this is the magic bullet and this is the only reason why I have anxiety, or again you could fill in the blank with any other health issue. But there's a
Hmm.
whole field of research referred to as the cytokine model of cognitive function, and that cytokines are pro-inflammatory cells, and it's looking at how inflammation impacts how our brain works, how inflammation is impacting mental health. And in the West, we like to separate mental health from physical health. But in fact, mental health is physical health. Our brain is part of our body. And the idea that this is just some esoteric, non-measurable thing is actually not true. So we have to look at the components. And this isn't just my opinion or functional medicine's opinion. There's quite a bit of evidence, and it's growing in the scientific literature, looking at the components, the physiological components to what manifests as anxiety or depression or fatigue or brain fog, any other mental health issue, autism, ADD, ADHD. But the gut, specifically what you mentioned, your gut is a major influencer of brain health. Our gut and brain are actually formed from the same fetal tissue. Their babies are growing, the gut and brain are formed together, and they're inextricably linked for the rest of our life through what's known in the scientific literature as the gut-brain axis or the gut-brain connection. And if you think about it, our intestines even resemble the brain, for that, and probably many other reasons we don't know. And 95% of our serotonin, our happy neurotransmitter, is made in the gut, stored in the gut. And our gut's actually referred to in the research as our second brain for these reasons. And there's many studies looking at the way that inflammation impacts how our brain works and the connection of the gut-brain axis, sort of these gut-centric components to inflammation. Because our gut's not only our second brain, but it's also home to 75% of the immune system. So inflammation is a product of the immune system. So to understand inflammation, you have to understand where the predominance of the immune system resides. So when you're looking at brain health and mental health, you have to understand the impact that the gut's wielding, both through the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, but also the impact that it can cause systemic inflammation and the role that inflammation impacts in mental health as well. And there's other pathways as well, because 20% of your thyroid hormone is converted in the gut. It regulates a lot of other hormonal pathways. It's dealing with detoxing as well, which that can impact mental health. So there's a lot of far-reaching mechanisms, pathways that the gut can influence the relationship with the brain.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I'm digesting everything you just said. That's incredible. I mean, I guess a couple things that stood out to me. I mean, I didn't even realize that serotonin was stored in your gut, first of all.
In the enterocytes, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super fascinating. Like I had no, I'm thinking all of this is literally like in your brain. If you want to increase serotonin, then, you take an antidepressant or, you figure out ways to increase your serotonin naturally, but it's all I just specifically connected that to the brain, not necessarily our gut. So that's very fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. And these are measurable things that studies are now pointing to. And look, we're at the cutting edge. I mean, in 10 years more time, we're going to understand this so much more and be able to measure this so much better. But like where we're at right now is really an awesome time because it's the duality of the time that we live in. While we see these epidemic rises of autoimmune issues and mental health issues, the other side of the coin is we understand them a lot more than we did 10 years ago. And I've been in this space for over 11 years professionally, and years before that just as a layperson interested in this as well. That's why I got into it. But 11 years consulting patients around the world really allows you to see all these variables that are different from people to people, but you start seeing the different collection of variables to look at. And again, it starts with the health history to kind of know, okay, what components to their care is the most relevant? Because is it a gut issue? Is it a toxicity issue? Is it a hormonal imbalance? Is it mental, emotional? Is it just circumstantial or situational? Is it a stressful job? Is it a toxic relationship at home? Is it a lack of sleep? All of these things. And again, normally it's not just one thing. Normally it's a confluence, like a perfect storm of different variables, both physiological and circumstantial. So it is definitely something that I am fascinated with, and it never stops amazing. I'm always amazed by what are the components to people's health puzzle.
Yeah, no, I kind of love this idea that you're talking about where, physical health, it's not just like you said, this one component, it's this like all encompassing, and a lot of, I feel like standard PCPs like don't take into account, people's environment or emotional stressors when it comes to their physical health. So I very much applaud you on that. I think that's something that's really lacking. And what could you speak to your background a little bit in that? And like what made you want to, what's your journey to kind of, I guess, getting into that train of thought, or how did you kind of start treating patients like that?
Well, I've always been in functional medicine. So I went to an integrative medicine school, Southern California University of Health Sciences, where there's MDs and DCs and acupuncturists and oriental medicine doctors and nurse practitioners, all kind of there learning different modalities. They have different schools within SUHS. And then I heard of a guy who had gone to my school. He was older than I was, but his name was Datis Karazian. And still today, Datis Karazian is one of the leading thought leaders in functional medicine. And he was talking about this exciting field of healthcare called functional medicine. So I knew when I was in school that I wanted to get into functional medicine. And I knew really early on, because I would be talking about it in capacities like this or on blogs like writing, that there were other people in states in different countries that were looking for support and guidance on these variables. So we've been doing the telehealth, like online webcam consultations since the beginning. So it's interesting that right now I'm literally doing the same thing I've done for the past 11 years. But now it's a lot more commonplace for having telehealth and telemedicine, and functional medicine's a lot more mainstream. But
Yeah.
I just came out of school knowing this is exactly how I wanted to do it. And it's really been a blessing to be a part of somebody's, really, I take it as a sacred responsibility to be a part of somebody's health journey, because it's really hard to be the person struggling with the health issues, whether that's mental health or, or autoimmune issue, and giving direction in a very disillusioning space where it's like, what the heck is right? Because we hear all this conflicting information with Dr. Google, who's a very fickle physician.
Exactly.
You can substantiate your worst fears with Dr. Google, and you can substantiate your point that you want to prove by just a click of a button. My agenda is what's right for you, and that's not necessarily going to be the right thing for the next person. So I try to keep my agenda out of it, and even what worked for me out of it, because I have a family history of autoimmune conditions on both sides of my family, and it's really fascinating. And it would be very appropriate to talk about it here. Is that for some people, not everybody. Remember, in functional medicine, we see things like anxiety or fatigue or brain fog or autoimmune. We see those as the check engine light. Well, what is it? For some people, underneath the hood to their anxiety is an autoimmune component. And not everybody. Again, it could be completely irrelevant to the next person. But for people who have a family history of autoimmunity, for people that have other autoimmune markers, we can measure with labs an neurological autoimmune component to it. And there's different ways that can happen, but against different brain neurological tissue, against something called GAD65, which is a precursor to GABA, actually, which is the anti-anxiety, basically the calming neurotransmitter of the body. And if the immune system's attacking the precursor to GABA, you're relaxing, like endogenous Xanax, if you will. If your body's attacking that, that's neurological autoimmune reactivity. It's not an overt autoimmune disease, but it's an autoimmune reactivity. It's an autoimmune component to your anxiety. So we can measure that on labs. There are labs that can kind of give that objective data to be evidence-based, instead of just saying, well, it's mental health, so we don't have to run any labs and let's give you the Xanax or this antidepressant. Well, what's actually the mechanism at play here? Because is it autoimmunity, or is it a gut issue? Is it a toxicity issue? Is it a hormonal balance? Is it some sort of situational thing, or is it a confluence of those factors? So those are the questions that I ask, instead of just diagnosing a disease, matching it with a medication. Everybody with anxiety gets this medication. We want to see, okay, why do you have the problem in the first place? It's not a Xanax deficiency. It's not an antidepressant deficiency. So let's actually see what's upstream. What's the root cause of, and again, not like you said, we're not anti-medication in functional medicine. There's a place for that. But we just ask the question, why do you have the problem in the first place? And number two, what is your most effective option that causes you the least amount of side effects? And for some people, medications fit that criteria. But for a lot of people, they can get to the root cause, deal with it, so they don't have to be on medications for the rest of their life. And that doesn't mean that they can't be on these medications for a season while they deal with these issues. But what's the end game? Is it to stay on this pill forever, or is it to actually deal with it? So these are the questions that we ask. And every case is different, but these are the things that we ask.
I love that. And, we talk a lot about like getting to the root cause and, helping people get better. So, I guess particularly bringing it back to, inflammation being such an issue. So what are some ways, that people can kind of treat that naturally? Like, what are some good anti-inflammatory like foods or spices or supplements that kind of, people can kind of start taking that just sort of help with inflammation in general? What would you suggest?
Well, it starts with food, right? I mean, and we talk about this. I talk about this at length in The Inflammation Spectrum, which is my second book. I actually talk about this concept in both books. First book is Ketotarian. It's a mostly plant-based ketogenic book, keto book.
Wait, quick interruption. I've been reading it.
Yes.
I love it. My terrible receipt bookmarker here, but yes, I'm loving it. Very excited for some recipes. Much. So no,
did you get it at Costco? I don't know, because they sell it at Costco.
I did not. Not to like get your hopes up that's in Costco. I apologize, but no, I had actually got it off Amazon, and then I was coming in from a grocery run, and immediately sat down and started looking at some recipes. So hence the bookmark.
I love it. It works. It works. I do the same thing. I have receipts and cards as bookmarks. It's no judgment zone.
Thank you.
So I talk about it in Ketotarian because why? Beta hydroxybutyrate, the ketone that our body naturally endogenously makes in ketosis, it's not just a way for people to burn fat, which is what excites most people for the ketogenic diet, but it is also a signaling molecule, an epigenetic modulator, meaning it does cool things for our health. Namely, it passes through the blood-brain barrier and calms neuroinflammation, which anxiety and depression, fatigue, brain fog. So it improves brain health, sharpness, clarity, calming effect on the brain. So I talk about that brain inflammation component in Ketotarian in relationship to how can you go keto in a clean way. It's a mostly vegan keto, vegetarian keto, and pescatarian keto way of eating. So that's what Ketotarian is. But I want to have a broader discussion about how can you calm inflammation beyond a clean, mostly plant-based ketogenic Ketotarian diet in the inflammation spectrum. So in the inflammation spectrum, I'm talking about the larger view of educating people on the inflammation spectrum, but just educating people of how it manifests in different ways, but as far as our gut and brain or hormones or detoxification system, looking at autoimmunity, but not just in using a plant-based ketogenic diet, but what are other foods, medicines to focus on, what are non-food things, looking at stress and toxins and social media addiction and screen time and sleep and all that stuff. Those are, because you can eat really healthy, but if you're serving your body a big slice of stress every day, it's sabotaging all the good things you're having with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we're talking about more than just food in the inflammation spectrum, but food is a component of it. So we start the book out with a quiz in the inflammation spectrum, and the quiz is adapted from questions that I ask patients. So I wanted people to find out where they're at on the inflammation spectrum and what areas on the spectrum are the most applicable to them. So from low-grade symptoms, like maybe low-grade fatigue, background anxiety, like a sense of anxiousness, or maybe some digestive bloating on one end of the inflammation spectrum, all the way to the other end of the inflammation spectrum, which is the overt diagnosable ICD-10 like mental health issue or autoimmune condition or diabetes, heart disease, etc., and then everything in between. And then there's 7 main sections on the inflammation spectrum in the book, where we're talking about the gut, brain, hormones, detox, all the systems. And so we're finding out how much inflammation may be in the body with the quiz, and then what areas are the highest scores. So for example, like let's say they scored higher and then the brain score is the highest in the area, and they're struggling with anxiety and things like this. So at that point, they would bring things into their life that have been shown in the studies to help to support healthy brain function. So things like adaptogens are a good plant group to lower brain inflammation. Things like ashwagandha or holy basil, tulsi, have a quite calming adaptogenic support. And these are things you can get in teas, or you can add them to smoothies or cook with, or take in supplement capsule form or powder form. There's various forms to get them. Or things like healthy fats are needed for a healthy brain. So your brain is 60% fat. 25% of all your body's cholesterol is in your brain. So healthy fat soluble vitamins like A, D, K2 are needed for brain health. Healthy omega fats, healthy even saturated fats are needed for healthy brain function. Healthy monounsaturated fats are needed for brain function. So a variety of different naturally occurring fats from food is definitely going to be advantageous for the brain. And then different spicy compounds like curcuminoids, the compounds in turmeric, the spice, has been shown to lower neuroinflammation as well. And you could talk about other compounds too, like resveratrol has some exciting studies around it, and that's a compound's ability to lower neuroinflammation as well. So there's a lot of things you can do, both with food and supporting natural medicine compounds to help support healthy brain function.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So, you kind of talk like I said, I was reading Ketotarian and kind of, diving into, reducing inflammation. And I feel like something that also kind of goes, hand in hand in that is, the use of like probiotics and kind of helping your gut overall function better, because I feel like if you don't feel well in your gut, like you're not digesting properly, that also is going to affect, your mood and how you feel, how you function. So, I was hoping you could dive into that a little bit, kind of talking about the use of like prebiotics and probiotics. I feel like there's still maybe a lot of confusion with us, like lay people, about how to implement pre and probiotic use, and kind of, also a second part to that, I guess, like what foods are good for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. So there are studies to show that different colony-forming units, or basically neighborhoods of bacteria, lower levels are associated with things like anxiety and depression and fatigue. So the trillions of bacteria in our gut, collectively known as the microbiome or the small life, just to put that into perspective, there's studies that show that there's upwards of 100 trillion bacteria in our gut, and there's about 10 trillion human cells. So we are all 10 times more bacteria than human, a sort of sophisticated host for the microbiome. So you have to think of it as this massive microbiome metropolis that's filled with these rich, diverse microbiome city neighborhoods that are telling your brain how to be instructed, how to function, telling your immune system how to be instructed, telling your mood, telling your weight, telling your metabolism how to be instructed. So it's very, very powerful.
Mhm.
Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, every doctor takes the Hippocratic oath. He said all disease begins in the gut, and I don't know how he knew that, but that's why he's the father of modern medicine, and I'm not. But research is confirming what he knew in antiquity, that the majority of health problems today, not just mental health issues, begin in the gut, at least a part of it, and should be looked at because it is so richly influential. But probiotics, prebiotics. So basically, we like to think of probiotics, like the beneficial bacteria, as being like grass seed. You just take the pill and it like populates and grows bacteria. What studies are pointing to it, the mechanism of action is not exactly like that, at least how we understand it today. It's more of like it's influencing the economy of the microbiome. It's encouraging diversity. It's encouraging growth of other microbes. And studies show that you have to be consistent with that, because when you stop taking it, it tends to slow down. I am always an advocate of food first. You cannot supplement your way out of a poor diet. So you have to start with, yes, probiotics can be a tool, but it's not going to be the massive kind of modulator, in my opinion, for most people. And that's not to say that certain supplements can't be modulators. They are. But to me, the more influential is, what are you doing with breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Every meal is another opportunity to feed inflammation or fight it, feed gut health or fight it. So how can we do that with the next meal at hand? So it's variety of plant foods, and I would say cooking plant foods is first and foremost advantageous for a lot of people, because many people have impaired gut health. They're not even able to break down food very well, because we aren't just what we eat, we are what we absorb. And then many people have such poor gut health that they're not able to even make use of these clean, healthy plant foods. And look, I wrote Ketotarian. It's a mostly plant-based ketogenic book. I am for people to focus on a variety of plant foods, but they should make it more bioavailable by cooking predominantly, and not say everybody has to have every meal cooked. But
Right.
generally speaking, the more impaired your gut health, the more you should be cooking your foods. If you do have an okay gut, then you can have some raw vegetables, no big deal. So, but it allows, yes, it breaks down the vitamin content by cooking it, but the vitamin content that's left, the nutrient density that's left, is going to be more usable and less insulting to the gut, because people are getting bloated in pain from like salads. It's not the
Mm.
salad's fault, it's the impaired gut health's fault. So give your gut a little bit of a break by cooking things, having it almost like pre-digested in a way, in soups and stews and even sauteed and things like that. Um, why is that important? A variety of plant foods have a variety of different fibers that research shows the more diverse your plant food intake is, the more diverse your microbiome is. So your gut bacteria eat what you eat, and they love to eat fiber from plant foods. And it enables them to grow and to populate and ferment the fibers and to make short chain fatty acids, which are needed to lower inflammation and help the immune system and help digestion. And if you one of the short chain fatty acids, these end products of bacterial fermentation, it's called butyrate. And there's a lot of exciting research around butyrate and its ability to help the immune system and help lower inflammation, etc. But butyrate that your gut's making endogenously through fermenting plant fibers is also, it's related to beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB, the ketone. So it's, you can, and they have similar health benefits too. So your gut's making this, and you are obviously, when you're in a ketotarian way of eating, you can produce ketones as well. But ketones are quite therapeutic for the gut in lowering inflammation and helping stabilizing the gut-brain axis. So definitely, that's what I would say, is focus on fiber-rich foods that are gentle on the gut to facilitate microbiome diversity, because again, the more diverse your microbiome, the healthier we are, generally speaking. And that's not talking about dysbiosis or overgrowths like bacterial overgrowths or candida or yeast overgrowths. It's just saying good, healthy probiotic bacterial diversity is associated with healthy, longer life.
I love that. What's this kind of ketotarian diet or reducing inflammation diet? Like what does this look like for someone that's trying to implement this? Obviously, like, I don't want to overwhelm people, and making changes is hard, especially if you're very far removed, from a diet, like this. So how would you suggest someone start implementing that if they are looking to kind of switch gears and eat this way?
The way that I advocate, and there's in the book when I wrote it, and this part of the book I actually wrote. My wife was driving. I was visiting her dad in Arizona, and it's funny that we're talking about this now because I remember exactly where I was. I was on my laptop typing, and she's driving from Pine Top where they lived down to Scottsdale, and I was like, okay, I need to have like a super like biohacker sciencey route, and I need to have that's still digestible and usable, but more of like the advanced track, and then I wanted a keeping it simple track too. So the keeping it simple track, it's just for people who want to lean into this stuff. They don't want to get super detailed. They want to keep it simple. I like keeping it simple. I don't like to be overly. I want to make food fun and effortless and graceful and not so like obsessive. But there are a lot of biohackers out there that want the nitty gritty science stuff too. So I had to like speak to both audiences. So the keeping it simple track leans people into this way of eating where you don't have to be testing ketones if you don't want to. You don't have to be doing all this stuff if it's not appropriate. It's just keeping it simple, using food as medicine, eating really delicious food that's clean, that's sustainable and practical for you. So these ketotarianisms, as I call it in the book, are just a breakdown of the simple like takeaways. So it's when you have a healthy fat, add some non-starchy vegetables. When you have some non-starchy vegetables, add some healthy fats. Very simple. Eat until you're hungry, eat until you're satiated. Eat when you are hungry, and eat real food. That's really the ketotarianism. It's very simple. And then there's over 81 recipes in the book with which your Costco see is marking. There's meal plans in there. There's a lot of simple ways to do this where you don't even need to keep it super complicated. You can just make it simple and do those things. So when I say healthy fat, like what I mean by that is avocados, avocado oil, olives, extra virgin olive oil, soaked nuts and seeds to make them digestible for the body, coconut cream, coconut milk, coconut meat, those are the vegan keto options. And then there's the vegetarian keto options, which are like eggs, egg yolks, like the whole egg, obviously, and ghee, clarified butter, grass-fed. And then the pescatarian keto options, which are wild-caught fish, like fatty fish, what I call vegetarian in the book. It's still predominantly plant-based, but it has like the seafood aspects of it, and then obviously all the vegetarian and vegan keto options that I mentioned. But those are all like the healthy fats that when you have those, bring in some sautéed vegetables in, or bring in like a soup with some vegetables in there. So you could definitely keep it super simple with that. And we talk about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding in the book too. So that further enhances the benefits of ketosis because it allows your body to be in a deeper ketosis. And then you refeed and eat the food in your time-restricted window. So there's a lot of tools in the book to make it super simple.
So with fasting, is that just giving your body more time to sort of allow your food to digest and not be so hard on your digestive system, or what do you see like the role of fasting kind of playing in this whole process?
It's the way that I see it is both. It's a cause and effect. So the more fat adapted somebody is, the more stable they are, more metabolic flexibility they have, the more they'll randomly fast. Not because they're willing it or thinking about it or like they're doing a fasting protocol, but they're falling back on that ketotarianism of eat when you're hungry. The more stable you are, the more log you have on the fire that's burning fat for fuel instead of burning sugar for fuel, they'll just typically my first meal will be around lunchtime, not because I'm thinking I'm fasting. It's just because that's when I'm starting to feel hungry. But you get that as a result of being metabolically having metabolic flexibility, and eating this way. But conversely, it's an effect of ketosis, but it's also a cause of it, meaning the more you fast, your body is going to take from its own fat stores and release ketone bodies. So it'll enhance ketosis, but it'll also be the result of being in ketosis. Does that make sense? So basically, It's a tool to use. The more metabolically flexible you are, the more you'll randomly do time-restricted feeding. But conversely, you can lean to intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding protocols to enhance ketosis because your body is going to start burning this. So a lot like what the ketogenic diet is and what ketotarian is a fasting mimicking diet. It's getting a lot of the same benefits of fasting without actually fasting. Autophagy or cellular repair, which is super important for the brain. It's sort of cellular recycling for brain cells. But you see a lot of the similarities. If you look at fasting research and ketogenic research, a lot of the same mechanisms are at play. Why? Because ketosis is what's happening for both of them. You're in ketosis with fasting, and you're in ketosis with ketogenic diet.
I see. Okay, so you're seeing the fasting more of a result of almost just listening to your body's natural hunger signal, saying like I'm not hungry yet, and that therefore is giving you more of a prolonged time. Sorry about that. A more prolonged time to basically wait before you're eating is kind of what you're
Totally.
getting at there, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's allowing, and again, it's important too to have context around this conversation. We're not saying starvation. We're not saying an eating disorder, disguised as a wellness practice. This is about
Right.
the refeeding and nourishing your body with nutrient dense foods is just as important as fasting, but it's the yin and the yang. We like to be so extreme with our society. Well, it's you're either for fasting or against fasting, and you have both tribalism happening at both ends of the spectrum of one saying it's a problem, the other side saying it's the only way. But the truth is typically somewhere in the middle, and there's a way to do fasting, but more isn't always better. And you need to realize how to have a grace and lightness for all this stuff, and realizing that context matters. And it's not very clickbaity, but it's the truth when it comes to health and anything else we're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Because I feel like, yeah, the whole thing with fasting, it's just preached like, which is kind of scary. Like you said, if someone does maybe have issues surrounding food, where it's just like, no, don't eat, don't eat, don't eat. That's not what you're saying at
No,
all. It's more
not what
just
I'm saying.
listening to your
Yeah.
body. I love
Be
that.
gentle, be gentle, be gentle. And that's anybody. And what does gentle look like depends on where you're starting from, being and where you're at headspace
Is
wise. So if it's creating stress and anxiety for you, if it's creating disordered eating, it's not right for you. Drop it. But if it's a tool that you can use and bring grace and lightness and feel better, then use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So I'm looking over my questions here. Some more stuff I want to dive into. Oh my gosh, so much here. And you've really hit on so much. Oh, I know what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk about, you know, I think one thing that's particularly hard when you have anxiety is like getting outside of your comfort zone. So, it's one thing to have this safe environment of, changing your diet and cooking at home. So what do you suggest when you're kind of obviously like if you're traveling or you just want to get out of the house and go eat dinner somewhere or get lunch, kind of talk about how to navigate that and like what the best way to kind of make some options and yeah, how to kind of handle that.
Sure. And it's very important because you want to make this sustainable and practical. And this is part of my job. I mean, talking to people the past 11 years with this stuff, we really immerse ourselves in these cases when we're consulting them online to say, okay, depending on your job, depending on your preference, depending on what your schedule looks like, how are we going to make this doable? So definitely it's going to depend on the person down to the nuanced components to this. But we did include in both the books, like in Ketotarian, we have Ketotarian on the go options, like just quick things you can throw in your bag, throw in your car, take on a plane, and be super simple with it. So, I mean, be prepared. Meal planning is important. You don't have to be super detailed with it, but just set yourself up with things in your house, in your pantry, in your fridge, or at work that hey, it's going to be accessible, it's going to be easy. And we live in such an awesome time where places like Aldi or Costco or even Walmart and Target, they have so many, and Amazon and like there's so many Whole Foods and Amazon requirement. There's so many options for convenience factors where necessary. Like obviously, I think cooking is important in preparing that, but we live in a busy time, and that's not always the most convenient component for everybody. So there's a lot of options in the book for ideas to have snacks, have meals on the go, have simple things. You don't have to be a fancy chef to be healthy. But it's there for people who want to, put a little bit of time in the kitchen too. The so that's it's very doable. I've heard every excuse in the book, legitimately almost every. I can't think. You hear the same things over the years. Okay, I've heard this before. We have an answer for that, and then we can
Yes.
give you solutions. So I try to put a lot of those FAQs in both the books because I've heard it. These linchpins or these hurdles of like why I can't do this. Let me tell you all the reasons why I can't be healthy. There's normally a solution to that.
I love that. That's great. um, let me see here. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything here. Um, so yeah, so I think we really hit on so many of the things I wanted to talk about, with food helping to kind of calm our anxiety and natural ways to treat that. And I think one of the last couple things I want to dive into, because you mentioned having healthy fats in your diet. And I know this is still something that it still instills a lot of fear in people, like eating fat, and people don't want high cholesterol and people get really concerned about that. So, can you kind of talk about that a little bit and like what healthy fats particularly, people should be having, what they do, why to not maybe be so afraid of them? Should we just have that in moderation? If you could speak to that a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, so to be very clear, again, everybody's different, but everybody needs some healthy fats in their diet. Some people should
Gotcha.
be focusing on other fats. Some people should moderate their fats. Some people should be eating more healthy fats. Most people should be eating more healthy fats. So what are they? The most well-researched ones are like olives and all extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, soaked nuts and seeds. Those are going to be the predominantly like most people are going to tolerate those very well. Omega fats from fish, obviously nuts and seeds and like chia seeds, flax seeds have omegas, but they're not the long chain omegas. So the more bioavailable omegas are found in fish and algae, like different sea algae. So that's going to be these vegan keto fats that I talk about in ketotarian, and people should not fear them. But saturated fat is needed, and every source of fat's going to have a collection of these fats. Like we like to oversimplify it and say, well, grass-fed beef or like beef is just saturated fat. And the reality is it's not. There's a lot of omega fats in there as well. So there's always going to be a different collection. Now, there's just higher percentages of certain fats and lower percentages depending on the food that you're talking about. But when you talk about whole foods, typically you're talking about a collection of different naturally occurring fats. Now, generally speaking, as I mentioned earlier, our brain is predominantly fat. Our immune system needs healthy fat. Our immune system needs healthy fat. Our hormones need healthy fats. Every cell of our body needs healthy fats because it's aligned with it's bound by a phospholipid fatty membrane, every cell of our body. So it's needed for hormone signaling and hormone production, all this stuff. So it's super needed. In low-fat diets, there's growing amount of studies to show that low-fat diets are actually really bad for the brain long term, and really bad for our hormone health long term.
So
And I
why
mean,
why is that?
well, because you're depriving your brain of what it's made of.
Okay.
So you're
Missing
not
that
actually,
resource.
yeah, you're
Oh,
missing that raw material that is needed for brain function and making healthy neurotransmitters and hormone production. So it's definitely problematic. And there are certain insurance companies, and look, I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But there is
yes.
insurance companies that will actually decline health insurance policies and life insurance policies for people with too low cholesterol just as much as too high cholesterol because it's not healthy for human health.
Oh, wow.
Um, and many doctors say, well, there's no lower limit of cholesterol, like as low as you can go, and that's just not accurate. When you look at the studies, they have a higher mortality rate, they have a higher rate of disease, they have a higher rate of mental health problems with low cholesterol. But look, it is the Goldilocks principle. You want balance, just like I mentioned with inflammation and our hormones and our gut microbiome. It's about balance, not too high, not too low, but just right.
Yeah.
And the and in truth, when you look at what we're dealing with here, the reality is we need more of these raw materials that our body needs to make. And it's estimated that 50%, half of people who have heart attacks and strokes have normal to low cholesterol. So seeing cholesterol as being the demon and it's it's like super just cut and dry that cholesterol above 200 is problematic. Well, context matters again. It's you can't be oversimplistic with that and make broad sweeping statements because what's the context of the 200? So total cholesterol, the sum of LDL and HDL, is a pretty poor predictor for assessing risk factors for heart attack and stroke and health problems. So better predictors for people to understand this is you want to make sure your triglycerides or circulating fats under 100, which has nothing to do with your total cholesterol. Number two would be you want your HDL, quote unquote, good cholesterol, which is oversimplistic. You want that to be above 60. So that's, you don't want low cholesterol there, that you want actually high HDL or healthy levels of HDL above 60. You want to make sure your C-reactive protein, your inflammatory marker, is under 1, nothing to do with cholesterol, it's inflammation. You want homocysteine to be under 7, another form of inflammation, under 7. And you want to make sure that your glucose and your A1C, your blood sugar, and your average of blood sugar, your glucose is under 90 fasting, your A1C, which is a 3-month average of your blood sugar, under 5.5. Okay. And you want to make sure run what's called a nuclear magnetic resonance, or NMR test, which is a subfractionation of lipids particles. So basically the protein particles that carry cholesterol. Because if you do have oxidized, damaged, inflamed particles, or in pattern B, those small, dense LDL particles, those are problematic. But it's not the cholesterol's fault. It's the protein particles are damaged. It's the protein inflammation and oxidation. So they're like little BB bullets that can tear through arterial walls potentially. So you want pattern A with these non-oxidized, fluffy, buoyant, like protective cotton balls circulating around, carrying cholesterol around. So it's not cholesterol that's the problem. It's the inflammation that damages the particles that carry cholesterol that's the problem. It's blood sugar problems that's the problem. It's high triglycerides, which is triglycerides are high oftentimes because the body has too high blood sugar and high insulin. It's storing glucose or blood sugar as circulating fat or triglycerides. So it's inflammation. That's the problem, not cholesterol above 200. So you can have 200, let's just say for an example, you have a cholesterol of 250. You could have two people with that 250 cholesterol. And then both of those in a conventional doctor, they're going to say, you need to be put in a statin drug. Here's a statin drug for that too. Well, what's the reason why you have the problem in the first place? So sure. What's the context? Where's their HDL? Where's their triglycerides? What's their subfractionation? What pattern are they in? What's their inflammation levels look like? One person with 250, it has all those biomarkers off, and the other 250 has all those biomarkers right on. It looks great. Okay, well, that's fine. That 250, maybe it's a genetic thing, and it's fine. It's not super high. It's just around and all the other things look great. So that's context matters. And you can't just be oversimplistic and say, diagnose a disease, match it with a medication. And that's what's being done here, not just with statin drugs. You can apply that same approach to any other health problem under the sun. It's this medicinal matching game that's going on. And it's just not giving people really the tools that they need. And my question would be, okay, why, if those numbers are off for that one person and they have a 250 cholesterol levels, what's even causing that? It's probably not even the healthy fats to begin with. It's not. It's the refined carbohydrates. It's the junk food. And you have to look upstream to even that. What's going on in their gut? What's going on in their liver, which is making the cholesterol? And looking at the thyroid hormone. Low T3 levels can cause an accumulation of cholesterol. So you have to look at your hormones and the impact that they're having on cholesterol metabolism. So I'm saying all this stuff to just say, oversimplifying it and saying that dietary fat's problematic is just really outdated. It's not based in current data.
No, I love that. I love that discussion kind of around fat and cholesterol because like I was saying, I feel like that freaks a lot of people out. So it's nice to hear from, a medical doctor that sometimes like you said, depending on the scenario, higher cholesterol is not something that necessarily needs to be feared. It's just sort of understanding the reasons behind that high cholesterol. And I think that's something that, totally. Yeah, it really isn't, people don't dive into that conversation too much. It's just like you said, you have high cholesterol, either here's this drug or, change your diet, and those are kind of, yeah.
And it's also important too that the reality is they shouldn't be fearful overall. Like really, there are some people that genetically they should have less saturated fat, like ApoA2, ApoE3. There's certain alleles that are, some people are hypersynthesizers of cholesterol. So we look at ApoE3/4 and ApoE4/4, and there are certain exceptions where they should have less saturated fat, but that doesn't mean that they should remove all fat. They just have to focus on more avocados and extra virgin olive oil and wild caught fish. That's for them. And there's some people that don't have those genetic alleles. They handle saturated fat fine, and they could have more grass fed beef and coconut oil and things like that, and they're fine. So it's, yes, there is some bio individuality. Yes, there's a nuanced conversation about saturated fat, but please don't be so reductionist and say all fat is bad, because that's not accurate.
No, totally. And kind of wrapping things up here, I think the last thing I wanted to kind of leave people with is, they do want to make this dietary switch, like I said, and start eating better. What are a couple of staples that, you think people should start with, like having in their home, when they go to the store to pick it up, if they're looking to kind of have this switch, like 3 to 5 things that, would be really handy?
Yeah. So I would say, going back to those ketotarianisms, get a variety of plant foods, cook them when you can. Getting a variety of those healthy fats that I mentioned, those vegan keto, vegetarian keto, and pescatarian keto options. And getting lots of herbs and spices to make things taste good, and get the phytonutrients and the healing properties, the supporting compounds that they have. So I would say a variety of those, really. And I show it in the book how to make this delicious and simple. So it's not like it sounds like boring when I just make it that simple. But the reality is, when you put all that stuff together, it's amazing that every dish can taste completely different very simply. So I would say those are the things you should really focus on: those healthy fats, those greens, the sulfur-rich vegetables, to help with methylation, which you need for healthy brain function and hormone function. So that's things like asparagus and Brussels sprouts and those type of things, which are needed for healthy detox pathways and methylation.
Love it. Thank you so much for taking time out to do this, Dr. Cole. So where can people find you online? You're such a great resource. I love following your Instagram, kind of seeing, the suggestions of recipes that you talk about a little bit, and sort of this guide to eating this way. It's such a great resource. So if you wouldn't mind sharing where people can find you, please.
Yes, of course. Thank you again for having me. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. On Instagram, it's same thing, drwillcole at Dr. Will Cole. And yeah, you can get all the information. We have tons of free content on the website. We offer a free webcam or phone health evaluation to see if functional medicine is appropriate for them, see if a consultation with me is appropriate for them. So that's what I do.
That's amazing. I'll also link that in the show notes so that people can easily find that too. So much appreciate you taking time out. This is just a conversation I really wanted to have. I was so excited to have, because I feel like, when we talk about mental health, we don't really talk about food. So this was super cool. I've learned so much. I already can't wait to listen back to this, like for my own resource. This is incredible. So Dr. Cole, I can't thank you enough, and I'm very excited to share, your work with my listeners. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.